Mr. N.K. Singh, my colleagues on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome the opportunity today to share with you all my thoughts on the state of the world, which this conference apparently thinks is on fire. Now, on fire has many connotations. And there's a cricket match going on right now. I think Mohammad Siraj is on fire. New Zealand is 19 for 2. But in this case, I do appreciate that the fire is actually almost literal and that we are meeting in an exceptionally difficult time. Let me begin by thanking the organizers for actually crystallizing my own thinking for this panel by asking me to reflect on 3 interconnected concepts: geopolitics, geoeconomics, and the polycrisis. Now, the nature of my business is such that challenges will always be at the center of the conversation. This is not to say that we don't have outcomes, advancements, or even progress. On the contrary, there has been a lot of evidence to show, and really there's no question, whether we are speaking from the perspective of India or from the perspective of the world, that we are far better off today than we were a decade or 2 or 5 before. Yet, precisely because every set of solutions throws up a new generation of problems, we constantly dissect, analyze, debate, and sometimes even agonize. The really good people in my business, however, also imagine, anticipate, and foresee. So today, we need both an evolutionary approach as well as audacious thinking, however contradictory that might seem. And the reason for that is the churning on multiple fronts that the world is going through, not merely simultaneous stresses, but many with a clear potential for structural change. And at the same time, the overwhelming compulsion to ensure stability or at least mitigate catastrophes as the process of change unfolds. So let us then contemplate the major stress factors of our times. The most obvious and immediate is the devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Long COVID is not just a medical condition, it is even more a social and economic damage that many societies are experiencing, and one has to look to the extent that they can be rectified. It has also rolled back SDG progress in many countries, and in quite a few cases, revived challenges of nutrition, health, and gender divides that we were putting behind us. In some cases, the nature and effectiveness of governance came into question during the pandemic. Moreover, as supply chains started fraying, national insecurities emerged sharply and have actually continued to influence our thinking even after the pandemic. And not least, the iniquities of globalization were on stark display during the pandemic. Vaccine apartheid was its most graphic manifestation, when some nations had 8 times the stock of their population, while others just next door waited for their first vial. A second contributor to volatility is conflict in a globalized world, where consequences spread far beyond the immediate geography. We have already experienced this in respect of Ukraine. The ripple impact of what is taking place right now in the Middle East is still not entirely clear. Now, these particular cases may be headline news, but in different regions there are smaller happenings whose impact is not inconsequential. In the domain of violence, there is also the less formal version, if you would, that is very pervasive, is that given the seamlessness of our existence, any expectation that conflicts and terrorism can be contained in their impact is no longer tenable. A big part of this is clearly economic, but do not underestimate the danger of metastasis when it comes to radicalism and extremism. No danger is too distant anymore. Now, speaking of dangers, it is necessary to also look at the directly disruptive impact of climate events on the international economy. We have long debated that climate challenges as a trend undermine the well-being of our planet. However, as weather patterns shift, and often catastrophically so, they can affect the nodes of production as well as the supply chains that emanate from them. Given the increasing frequency of such weather happenings, this is now a risk that we need to build into our calculations. The working of the global economy has itself added to the concerning side of the ledger. The last few years have witnessed rising debt, often resulting from a combination of imprudent choices, unwise borrowings, and opaque projects. Market volatility has been difficult for smaller economies with a narrow trade basket to handle. Those highly exposed to tourism or remittances have experienced the consequences of slowdowns very strongly. International financial institutions have not been able to respond adequately, whether due to paucity of resources or lack of priority. Underlying all these concerns, however, are actually the structural deficiencies about which we can no longer be in denial. Since the Second World War ended and decolonization proceeded, we have actually seen a broadening of economic production and consumption across geographies. Obviously, this was bound to be uneven and non-linear, but overall, few would disagree with the proposition that the trend line was positive. This was especially so if one looked at it generation by generation, while of course making some provisions for anomalies. As globalization in the incarnation that we know currently got underway, much stronger economic improvements became visible. Entire countries, in fact entire regions, saw dramatic reductions in poverty and impressive improvement in living standards. We in India have experienced this in our own lifetimes. However, what has been inadequately recognized is that this whole exercise had both winners and losers. There can be individual countries or broader regions. They can also be constituent. They may be relative or they could be comparative, but any which way, they eventually translated into politics. In the international discourse for 2.5 decades, the conversation was largely dominated by globalization advocates who were themselves clearly beneficiaries. They portrayed those unhappy as outliers, if not worse. The mantra of opening up became so powerful that its social consequences was completely dismissed. And then one day, all of this has caught up with us. The last decade has therefore witnessed what were read as political earthquakes. If they took us off guard, it is because we didn't listen to the earlier tremors for so long. Now, my intention is not so much to dwell on the past as to caution that this is a continuing, possibly even intensifying process. Addressing the over-concentration of production has become a strategic necessity today. And recognizing the concentration of dissatisfaction is equally a political imperative. Those charged with responsibilities for international economic negotiations cannot disregard either. Part of the problem that we are all grappling with is that the reality that a substantial segment of the global economy is no longer market-based. Not just that, also the realization that large market shares, either as a producer or as a consumer, can be leveraged for non-economic purposes. As the knowledge economy advanced and the embedding of data became more pervasive, concerns of privacy, reliability, and security have all fused together. This has not happened overnight, and the truth is that the world sought to keep international economics to business as usual as long as possible. But as the last few years have brought home, and the COVID has really been a wake-up call in that regard, that is no longer tenable. We are rapidly entering an era of artificial intelligence and must think beyond Westphalian economics and factor in political sociology of production. This means that for all of us now, there has to be a sharp focus on how to create more resilient and reliable supply chains. It mandates a greater emphasis on trust and transparency in all facets of the digital domain. Important and admittedly difficult as both endeavors are, they are still only the building blocks of a larger re-globalization that must be attempted for our common good. We are all aware of the animated debate in the last years about decoupling, including its merits and its viability.